For some, Niccolò Machiavelli represents morality, for others, realism. The term Machiavellian has become an adjective for cunning or manipulative individuals, even though his theory went far beyond that. The Italian Renaissance thinker is often associated with tyranny, despite the fact that his writings never truly advocated for it. In reality, his sole interest was understanding how power and politics work, how leaders rise and fall. His most famous work, The Prince, written in the early 16th century, broke new ground by separating ethics from politics. Machiavelli analyzed human and social nature, but as it truly is, not as we might wish it to be. In practice, his advice proves useful for anyone looking to succeed in a political or competitive environment. Even today, in the 21st century, we can see his ideas influencing the world and being applied by powerful individuals. So, is Machiavelli evil, or better understood as pragmatic? According to Machiavelli, humans are inherently flawed. He argued that a leader must be capable of using both force and cunning to achieve their goals. Force for protection and conquest, and cunning to deceive their enemies. A ruler must be prepared to use any means necessary to maintain power and order. Thus, the ends justify the means, even if it involves questionable actions. In practice, harm can be inflicted in the name of a greater good. After all, it is better to be feared than loved. This famous Machiavellian phrase remains controversial to this day because it challenges our common moral sense of being good and doing good. Machiavelli asserted that kind and gentle leaders are easily exploited by others. In other words, overly kind people can be easily harmed by those who are more malicious and clever. We have the illusion that if we are good people, the world will treat us well. Sometimes we expect someone to treat us well simply because we treat them well. But you surely know someone who has suffered because they were too kind. And you probably know someone who benefited from being a little feared or cruel. Maybe you've even been on one of those sides yourself. Joanna was a young woman with a generous heart, but she didn't know how to stand up for herself. She believed that pleasing the people around her was the best way to show love and be accepted. However, this often put her in difficult situations where she was manipulated and disrespected. It all started in childhood. Joanna was very close friends with Clara, a schoolmate who loved playing house. Joanna, however, preferred playing tag, but to please Clara, she always accepted her suggestions. Every week, Clara chose the games, and Joanna never opposed. She was afraid that if she said no, her friend would distance herself. So, Joanna spent much of her childhood doing things she didn't enjoy, just to maintain the friendship. In her teenage years, this trait became even more evident. Joanna became known as the friend for all occasions. When someone needed help with their studies, she always said yes. When her friends wanted to go to the movies and chose a film she hated, Joanna simply smiled and went along. She believed that to be accepted, she needed to please others all the time. The result of this was that often she felt like no one truly cared about her. Despite always being surrounded by friends, she felt alone and unjustly treated. In college, Joanna began to feel emotionally exhausted. Her classmates would seek her out to solve their problems, but rarely included her in important activities or cared about her feelings. In one of her classes, she met Lucas, an outgoing guy who soon became her boyfriend. At first, the relationship seemed perfect, but over time, Lucas began to realize he could do whatever he wanted without resistance. He treated her with indifference, made decisions for her, and rarely asked for her opinion. Joanna, afraid of losing him, accepted everything. This pattern continued until Joanna found a new group of friends in her final year of college. Among them was Marina, an empathetic girl who noticed Joanna's submissive behavior. One day, after seeing Joanna being ignored by Lucas during an argument, Marina invited her for a serious conversation. She explained that Joanna had the habit of prioritizing others and neglecting her own desires, making her vulnerable to emotional abuse. Marina also pointed out that Joanna's altruism was not entirely selfless. Deep down, she sought approval and recognition. These words deeply affected Joanna. She began reflecting on her life and realized that she had always believed she was doing good, but in reality, she was expecting something in return: acceptance, love, or respect. Joanna decided it was time to change. She began setting boundaries, saying no, and putting herself first. At first, she felt guilty, but gradually she realized that taking care of herself was an act of self-love, not selfishness. Over time, Joanna ended her relationship with Lucas and began to be more selective about her friendships. In her new job, she learned to refuse tasks that were not her responsibility without fearing she would appear uninterested. Though the transformation process was challenging, Joanna felt a freedom she had never experienced before. For the first time, she was living according to her own desires and values. However, Joanna also reflected on how she could have taken a very different path. If she hadn't met Marina, she might never have recognized her behavioral pattern. The accumulated frustration could have led Joanna to rebel against the people around her. She could have become bitter, distrustful, and even cruel. After all, many people who start out as good end up turning their hurt into resentment and hatred. This phenomenon is known as the Lucifer effect, where good people, under certain circumstances, end up committing evil acts. Joanna realized there was no guarantee that her innate goodness would protect her from making mistakes. It all depended on the choices she made every day and her ability to deeply understand herself. Today, Joanna continues her journey of self-discovery. She knows that true goodness doesn't come from pleasing others at any cost, but from being honest with herself and acting with integrity. Her story reminds us that, although no one is born good or evil, our choices and the environment around us have the power to shape who we become. Now, returning to Machiavelli's teachings, remember that at the beginning of the video, I said, in practice, evil can be done for the sake of good. After all, it is better to be feared than loved. So, in practice, evil can, paradoxically, be used as a tool for good. This idea, as uncomfortable as it may seem, was explored by Niccolò Machiavelli, who stated, "It is better to be feared than loved." This challenging phrase confronts our idealized notion of morality, suggesting that kindness, when devoid of firmness, can be more harmful than helpful. Machiavelli did not glorify evil as an end in itself, but he recognized that human behavior is often driven by self-interest. He understood that leaders who rely solely on kindness and the approval of others become vulnerable, allowing others to manipulate their goodwill. For him, the ability to command respect, even at the cost of pleasing others, was essential for maintaining order and authority. The idea that evil can serve the greater good can be illustrated by difficult decisions that at first glance may seem cruel, but are aimed at preserving the greater good. For example, in times of crisis, leaders may take unpopular measures, such as cutting benefits or raising taxes, to ensure economic and social stability. These actions are often perceived as evil, but their goal is to prevent an even greater collapse. Moreover, human nature also responds better to a combination of respect and fear than to simple kindness. People who are always kind and avoid conflict are often seen as weak, while those who demonstrate firmness and assertiveness, even in a rigid manner, inspire confidence and prevent abuse. This does not mean abandoning ethics, but understanding that being loved is not always enough to guarantee survival or success in a competitive environment. However, this approach requires caution. The danger lies in crossing the line that separates necessary firmness from unjustified cruelty. When evil is used as a tool, it must be guided by a sense of purpose and balance, never by selfishness or sadism. A leader who rules through excessive fear or brute force loses their legitimacy and becomes a tyrant, destroying what they were meant to protect. In the personal sphere, this also applies. We cannot always please everyone, and the attempt to do so may lead us to neglect our own needs. Setting boundaries, saying no, and making tough decisions, no matter how uncomfortable, are essential parts of growth and survival. However, these choices must be grounded in ethical principles and in the pursuit of solutions that minimize harm, not in a deliberate desire to cause suffering. Thus, the Machiavellian concept that it is better to be feared than loved should not be interpreted as a license for cruelty, but as a reminder that good is not always achieved through the simple pursuit of acceptance. Balancing firmness with compassion is the true challenge, and those who can navigate this duality stand out not only as leaders, but as individuals capable of acting with wisdom in a world where goodness alone may not be enough.